Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a literally monumental chapter in human history: social protest movements. If you've ever found yourself wondering why we work the specific hours we do, or how everyday people actually won the right to a fair wage or the right to vote, well, those answers are rooted in the massive disruption caused by the Industrial Revolution. Just imagine your entire way of life, working outdoors, surrounded by your community, going at your own natural pace, just vanishing almost overnight, completely replaced by the deafening roar of factory machines. It's wild, right? Well, this explainer is all about how humanity reacted to that massive shock.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap of the historical human reactions we're going to explore today. We'll start with the initial industrial shockwave, look at the physical backlash of the Luddites, then unpack the big ideological clash of socialism versus capitalism. After that, we'll see how Karl Marx aimed to mobilize the workers, and wrap up by tracing the incredible journey of the women's rights movement.
All right, let's jump right into part one: the industrial shockwave, a changing world.
To really understand the protests, we have to grasp the sheer pain of this changing world. Just look at the extreme overcrowding and utter exhaustion captured in this 1876 engraving by French artist Gustave Doré. It brings us face to face with the poor quarters of London. Before this, many of these very people lived out in rural villages. That traditional agricultural community life, where people actually had a connection to the land and to each other, was completely lost. It was just replaced by these dark, cramped, smoggy alleyways.
So the core problem here was a drastic shift from a relatively secure, dignified peasant life to grueling factory floors. Let's put this in perspective. Imagine your school suddenly announcing that all recess is canceled forever, the rules are going to change daily based solely on the principal's mood, and you have absolutely zero say in the matter. That complete, total loss of personal freedom, that is exactly what workers felt on the factory floor. Unsympathetic managers could and did arbitrarily cut wages or crank up workloads just to maximize their profits.
Section 2. Luddites, smashing the machines. Because you have to ask, how do humans react when they're backed into a corner like this? And this brilliantly illustrates that first major reaction. Enter the Luddites. In the early 1800s, radical workers in England spontaneously began smashing power looms, these massive automated weaving machines, out of sheer desperation. You see, their traditional, highly practiced skills were suddenly rendered completely useless by machines that worked faster and cheaper. When you literally can't feed your family, and the factory owner absolutely won't listen, the machine itself becomes the enemy.
But I really want you to pause and think about this for a second. To what extent do you think breaking the machines actually helped those workers? Did it solve the root problem, or was it just treating a symptom? Think about today. We worry all the time about AI and automation replacing modern jobs. Is trying to destroy the technology ever a permanent solution, or is the real issue about how that technology is managed?
Now, it's absolutely crucial to know that the Luddites, acting in the name of this mythical, kind of Robin Hood-like figure called General Ned Ludd, they weren't just mindless vandals. Actually, scratch that. They had highly organized demands. They wanted a minimum wage. They wanted strict control over the exploitation of women and children in factories. They demanded jobs for people displaced by machinery. And most importantly, the right to form trade unions legally. Ultimately, they were fighting for basic human dignity.
Let's transition to part 3, socialism versus capitalism. While the government brutally suppressed those physical Luddite protests, a totally new kind of reaction was brewing, an ideological one. This new ideology was socialism. Early thinkers, guys like Babeuf and St. Simon, believed that individuals shouldn't be forced to work in cutthroat isolation just to survive. They believed in cooperation. So the basic definition of socialism is an ideology calling for public ownership and control of property and natural resources for the benefit of everyone. Think of it like a massive group project at school. Since the entire class contributed to building the project, socialists argued the entire class should share the grade and the rewards equally, instead of just one person taking all the credit. To really grasp this, let's just break it down to its most basic level. Capitalism is based on private ownership, where wealth naturally tends to be distributed to a few owners, and the whole system is incredibly competitive. Socialism, on the flip side, advocates for public ownership, where resources are shared cooperatively by the very people who produce them. Socialists looked around and complained that under capitalism, A term like individual freedom was essentially meaningless if a worker had to blindly obey a factory owner just to avoid starving to death. Moving right along to Section 4, Marx and the Workers. Here's where things get really intense. Now, what's really interesting about this historical pyramid poster is how clearly it lays out the theory. Look at the layers. Down at the very bottom, you see the workers physically holding up the entire structure. The text literally says, "We work for all and we feed all." Above them, you've got the wealthy elites eating, the military shooting, religious figures fooling, and the rulers governing. Thinkers Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels used arguments just like this to claim that capitalism fundamentally exploits the bottom to endlessly enrich the top. Marx's argument was basically this. Because industrial production had become a massive, multi-person effort, not just a small family farm anymore, it was fundamentally a social affair. So his ultimate call to action was radical. He believed workers must completely overthrow the capitalists. He argued they should take over the state government, establish a workers' state, and own all the factories and land collectively. The goal? To plan production for the benefit of everyone, meaning society produces exactly what people need, like housing and food, not just what makes the most profit for a few. And hey, these definitely weren't just European ideas, they spread like wildfire globally. In India, socialist concepts deeply inspired some massive leaders. Swami Vivekananda was influenced by these growing ideas during his travels. As the nationalist movement against the British gained steam, leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Bhagat Singh embraced socialist principles. M.N. Roy even founded the Communist Party of India in the 1920s. These concepts directly prompted the organization of trade unions in India's rapidly growing industrial cities. Finally, Part 5, the women's rights movement. Because parallel to all these workers' struggles, another massive social transformation was kicking off. Let's move to and see how this builds chronologically. As you can see on the timeline, this absolutely did not happen overnight. It started with French women drafting their own declaration way back in 1791. Then it took decades of massive demonstrations by suffragists through the mid-1800s. And believe it or not, it wasn't until the Russian Revolution in 1917 that all women in a major nation were actually granted voting rights, followed eventually by England in 1928. It was a long, incredibly hard-fought battle. I really want to emphasize the sheer, bold defiance or that 1791 French Declaration. When the revolutionaries wrote the famous Rights of Man, women were entirely excluded. They were expected to just stay home and be quiet. So protesting women drafted their own document clearly stating, "Women are born free and remain equal to men in rights, equally admissible to all public dignities." Even though the French Assembly ignored it at the time, it planted a flag for absolute equality that could never be unplanted. Over time, the movement evolved. We often break this down into waves. Think of it kind of like leveling up in a game. First wave feminism was all about getting in the door, getting the legal right to vote, or suffrage, and securing basic political participation. But after World War II, women realized that voting wasn't quite enough if society still treated them as inferior in day-to-day life. So second wave feminism was about what happens once you're inside, demanding equal treatment in education, healthcare, and in your paycheck. Bringing this narrative back to India, the trajectory was heavily tied directly to the anti-colonial struggle. Mahatma Gandhi strongly emphasized women's participation, and because thousands of women marched, protested, and shaped the nationalist movement right side by side with men, the newly independent India granted women complete legal equality right out of the gate. They sought to immediately end those old discriminations in property and civil laws. So we've covered a lot today. The shock of the factories, the smashing of machines, the rise of entirely new economic ideologies, and the century-long battle for women's suffrage. But remember, history isn't just stuck in the past, it shapes our present. So I'll leave you with this thought. Look at the world right now. Do you see any social protest movements around you today that are still inspired by these exact same historical struggles for liberty, equality, and a fair share of the future? Keep that question in mind as you watch the news tonight. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.